On the afternoon of August 24, 79 AD, the Roman naval base at Misenum was quietly going about its routine. Positioned at the far edge of the Bay of Naples, it offered a commanding view of the surrounding geography. The commander of the fleet stationed there was Gaius Plinius Secundus, known as Pliny the Elder. Beyond his military rank, he was Rome's most prolific naturalist and a man devoted entirely to observation and logic. This illuminated manuscript of Naturalis Historia represents the sheer scale of his life's work. He spent decades categorizing the entirety of human knowledge into a massive 37-volume encyclopedia, dictating notes to secretaries even while bathing or traveling. Living with him was his 18-year-old nephew, Pliny the Younger. The young man shared his uncle's intense academic rigor, preferring to stay inside reading Roman history rather than enjoying the coastal sun. This specific combination of location and intellect meant Rome's most capable scientific mind was perfectly positioned to document an anomaly of nature that defied all Roman understanding. Early that afternoon, the Younger's mother noticed a strange formation on the horizon. A towering cloud of debris was erupting from a mountain across the bay, rising on a massive trunk of ash before splitting off into wide, dark branches, closely resembling an umbrella pine tree. The elder saw a phenomenon demanding immediate study. He called for his shoes, climbed to a higher vantage point, and ordered a light vessel prepped to observe the cloud up close. Just as he was leaving the house, a messenger arrived. It was a letter from a woman named Rectina, whose villa sat at the foot of the erupting mountain. She was trapped on the shoreline, begging the admiral for rescue. The scientific excursion ended instantly. The elder commanded the fleet's heavy warships to launch, transforming a solo observation trip into an organized evacuation operation. He steered his ships straight toward the danger zone, leaving his nephew behind at Misenum. The instinct to observe nature gave way to the duty to protect Roman citizens. That single decision sent the two men into separate, unfolding nightmares. As the elder's fleet crossed the bay, the water grew shallow from volcanic debris. Hot ash, cracked pumice, and blackened stones began raining heavily onto the wooden decks of the galleys. The conditions deteriorated so rapidly that his own helmsman pleaded with him to turn the ships around. The elder refused. He reportedly told his crew that fortune favors the bold, and ordered them to press on toward Stabiae. They reached the shoreline and found his friend Pompeianus, who had already loaded his belongings onto ships. That the same onshore winds that had carried the military fleet in now trapped them against the coast. Aware of the rising panic among the locals, the elder employed a calculated psychological tactic. He asked to be taken to the baths, sat down for a cheerful dinner, and then went to sleep. He snored loudly enough to be heard in the halls, even as the courtyard outside his bedroom began rapidly filling with pumice. When physical escape is impossible, a commander's most effective weapon is the illusion of control. And projecting absolute calm, he kept the terrified household from succumbing to chaos. Across the bay in Misenum, the next morning brought no sunlight. The sky turned blacker and denser than any ordinary night, forcing the younger and his mother to abandon the villa and join a panicked crowd fleeing on foot. Visibility dropped to zero, leaving them trapped in a terrifying acoustic environment. The younger later recalled hearing the wailing of infants, the shrieks of women, and the shouts of men trying to locate their families by voice alone in the pitch black. The sensory deprivation and raining ash were so absolute that many in the fleeing crowd began to pray for death. Others concluded that there were no gods left at all, and that the universe itself was ending. Shifting high-altitude winds pushed a dense wall of volcanic ash and suspended rock directly over the naval base, blocking out the sun and plunging the region into a total midday blackout. Stripped of military structure, daylight, and physical bearings, the citizens of the empire's greatest naval stronghold were reduced to primal terror. Back in Stabiae, the illusion of safety had shattered. Violent tremors rocked the villa, threatening to tear the building from its foundations. The elders group debated whether to stay indoors and risk structural collapse or take their chances outside. They chose the open air. As a defense against the continuous barrage of falling pumice and rock, they tied pillows to their heads with strips of cloth and made a desperate run toward the beach to check the boats. The sea was still too violent for escape. As they waited on the shore, the smell of sulfur announced the arrival of a toxic surge of volcanic gas sweeping rapidly across the coastline. The others scattered, but the elder was heavily built and suffered from a chronically weak windpipe. He stood up, leaning heavily on 2 enslaved men, and then suddenly collapsed, choking to death in the dense, oxygen-starved fumes. Rome's most celebrated naturalist and admiral had navigated decades of political and military hazards, but he was entirely powerless against the raw physics of a volcanic surge. When a yellowish daylight finally broke on August 26th, the Bay of Naples was unrecognizable. The lush, populated coastline had been smothered under a thick layer of gray ash and debris. On the Misenum side of the bay, the Younger and his mother had managed to survive the harrowing night on the road, outlasting the heaviest phases of the fallout. 2 days later, searchers located the elder's body at Stabiae. He was completely intact, with no external injuries, and his clothes were undisturbed. Those who found him noted he looked more like a man resting than a casualty of a cataclysm. That relatively peaceful death stood in stark contrast to the fate of the towns closer to the mountain. In Pompeii and Herculaneum, thousands of anonymous citizens were buried alive, asphyxiated, or instantly incinerated by extreme heat. The physical eruption had ended, but for the survivors, the immense psychological task of processing an unthinkable tragedy had just begun. 27 years after the ash settled, the historian Tacitus reached out to Pliny the Younger, asking him to document exactly how his famous uncle had died. This translated document represents the detailed letters he drafted in response. Surviving the Roman Empire's collapse, it provides the only eyewitness accounts of the devastation. His precise description of the umbrella pine ash plume was so accurate, volcanologists still call it a Plinian eruption. If the elder had not possessed the courage to sail toward the danger, and if the Younger had not possessed the endurance to survive and record it, the granular reality of Pompeii's final hours would have been buried permanently. History's first and most vital eyewitness account of a natural disaster records a family's struggle to survive the end of their world.